I recently watched an anime called Kaiji, which I bet a few of you are familiar with, or at least recognize the series by name, or by its subject matter being an anime and manga that's about gambling. And not just metaphorical gambling as in characters making decisions with high risk factors. For example, Joseph Joestar betting his life on the chance that he would be able to defeat actual gods in only 33 days. Kaiji is literal gambling. Rock, paper, scissors, cards, dice, pachinko, and pretty much any other game that can grasp the attention of the demons within a gambling addict. And goddamn does Kaiji do an amazing job at what it does. Making something as mundane as a game of war or just a simple lottery draw feel infinitely more intense and suspenseful than any other situation from any series in recent memory. So with Kaiji hands down being my favorite series I watched this year, and seeing how interesting and captivating a mangaka can make the concept of literal gambling be with good writing, I decided to take a deeper look into the various story arcs within JoJo's Bizarre Adventure that are heavily based around the concept of gambling, and see how the mangaka Hirohiko Araki was able to manifest a compelling narrative based around not just the risk and mind games that come with gambling, but with the twist of stand abilities involved. So today, let's talk about gambling in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. It's no surprise Araki is a fan of the concept of gambling, so much so, Araki's first ever published manga was a 31-page one-shot story, Bosu Poker, or by its English name, Poker Under Arms. As the name would imply, it is a story based around the card game poker, with a Western setting. So although a majority of Araki's work are shonen battle manga, once he established himself with JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, specifically around the time stands were introduced, this really opened up the creative floodgates, allowing story arcs and abilities to be based off really anything, no matter how mundane or bizarre of a concept, and thus Araki was able to revisit the idea of gambling in manga, but now with the bizarre twist of stand abilities. And it turned out Araki really enjoyed writing gambling narratives again, so much so, a stand-injected poker game was the first unconventional stand battle from Stardust Crusaders. All of the other fights before the iconic Daniel J. Darby showdown were based on physical combat rather than intense and suspenseful mind games and trickery. It was more so identifying the stand's ability, find the weakness, and then exploit that weakness. But speaking of the Daniel J. Darby encounter, this was Araki's first, but definitely not last gambling-based stand ability, and by far what was the most unconventional stand in the series at this point in time, as the stand abilities were always the main focus of the fights, but in the Darby arc, the stands took a step back, and rather than being the subjects of the arc, were just the catalyst, specifically Darby's Osiris. Its only purpose being to introduce a consequence to losing and creating a high risk factor that is the driving force behind a good gambling story. So the stand users' battle of trickery and strategy would be the true conflict. Although characters' stand abilities weren't completely moved from the arc, it was the Crusaders that had very offensive-based stand abilities, and since they weren't allowed to damage Darby in any way, at least not kill him, but still break a finger here and there, they had to find a way to use their stands in more of a mental way that would get inside their opponent's head, or to find a way to cheat. And if I learned anything about what makes a compelling gambling-based narrative from Kaiji, it's that someone needs to be cheating, and whoever is on the opposite side of luck needs to find a way to either survive or cheat better than their opponent. And Araki does exactly that. Rather than having the victory be based on pure luck and chance, he makes his characters develop strategies on how to ensure their victory through analyzing the situation, getting inside their opponent's head, and of course, by being a better cheater. So let's see how Araki put these concepts into practice, starting with, of course, the first major gambling arc in the series, Darby the Gambler. Starting with the beginning of the arc, the Crusaders stop at a cafe to ask some of the locals if they recognize a spirit photograph of Dio's mansion. Everyone in the cafe is unable to identify the location, and the group walks off, only to hear a man in the back of the crowd call their attention, claiming to know the location of Dio's mansion. And it's none other than Daniel J. Darby. And then the games begin. Darby will only share his information until someone agrees to gamble with him. The first up being Polnareff. Wildly underestimating the situation, Polnareff carelessly agrees to a bet that seems to be fair, a 50-50 chance will the cat go left or will the cat go right. But of course, this gamble was completely set up by Darby, as he was able to command the cat's decision. Darby is a master gambler, and as ironic as it sounds, he is a gambler who will leave absolutely nothing to chance. And with Darby ultimately crushing Polnareff in a completely rigged match, his stand ability is revealed, Osiris being able to remove the souls of those met with defeat in a gamble against him. And this gives the arc its tension, giving failure an extreme consequence, and sets the group up for failure, being at a complete disadvantage, as no matter how likely their victory seems, like Polnareff choosing the bigger piece of fish and Joseph cheating by adding more liquid to the cup, Darby was always 2 steps ahead of them, making his victory inevitable. So with only 2 Crusaders remaining, Jotaro and Avdol, we begin the game of poker, Jotaro realizing that no matter what game they play, no matter how many times they play, Darby will always be able to cheat, and cheat better than him. So Jotaro decides to bluff and do everything he can with Star Platinum to keep the game as fair as possible, like not allowing Darby to shuffle or deal cards after being blatantly caught with a false deal technique. But even after Jotaro chooses a random child from outside of the cafe to deal cards, the game is still in Darby's favor as the child was working for Darby, implying that every single person in and around the cafe was in on Darby's game, as Darby, being a master gambler, needs to prepare for everything, so he probably predicted that Jotaro would want someone else to shuffle or deal the cards if he was caught cheating with his false deal. So his preparation was pretty impressive, having every single person in that area on his side. And this setup made victory feel near impossible, so Jotaro decides to use his ultimate skill of looking very serious. And with one of the most badass plays Jotaro has ever made, he makes the decision to not even look at his cards, not out of fear or stubbornness, but out of the facade of confidence. This being the only way for Jotaro to ensure his what was once unlikely victory to now becoming complete domination with just a few subtle actions with Star Platinum to drive Darby over the edge and make him question everything about Jotaro's potential. Something as simple as using Star Platinum to light a cigarette was the last ace in Jotaro's hand to ensure victory. And through this one bluff and very creative use of Star Platinum, Jotaro was able to drive Darby to the point of mental exhaustion. So although Jotaro wasn't able to cheat better than Darby, he was able to create the illusion of cheating. So I'd say Araki was pretty successful at making an arc about gambling work, and seemed to really enjoy this writing style, as just 2 arcs later we are introduced to Talents T. Darby, Daniel's younger brother, and in contrast to the gambler, Talents is Darby the player, coincidentally having pretty much the same exact ability as Daniel, again creating a consequence for failure, but with the small but significant twist that we don't find out until the arc is nearing its climax, and it's that Talents' standard tomb can not only remove the souls of the defeated players, but it can read the soul's true intent. So although Talents was never a great gambler or cheater like his brother through natural talent, a tomb's additional ability made up for more than a lifetime of gambling experience, making him essentially unbeatable in, say, a game on predicting your opponent's choices, which in video games and gambling is everything. And Talents' game of choice is a variety of video games, but video games that he is extremely good at, the best even, as seen in his game of F Mega against Kakyoin. Although Kakyoin was surprisingly an advanced player, Talents' game knowledge was leaps and bounds ahead, showcased when using Kakyoin's car as leverage to make a normally impossible feat possible, skipping a large portion of the track, jumping over an empty space. So Talents doesn't always rely on tricks to defeat his opponents, as there really isn't any way to rig a match of F Mega, even with a binary soul reading ability. Talents just spends all of his time playing video games, and is really damn good. But this arc gets more into the gambling side of things when it's Jotaro's turn to go up against Talents and play the game Oh, That's a Baseball. Yeah, that's what the game is called, I guess. Anyways, the baseball game is heavily based on predicting your opponent's decision and responding accordingly. And this is a perfect game for Talents' soul reading ability to make him able to crush Jotaro pitch after pitch. And Talents, drowning in his own confidence, foolishly reveals to Jotaro and Joseph his stand's ability, just flat out telling them. Which of course, telling your ability to 2 members of the Joestar bloodline, especially with Joseph in there, is not a very good idea, so he was quickly defeated with a pretty good twist of Joseph using Herma Purple to make all of Jotaro's in-game decisions, so what he was reading in Jotaro's mind was not lining up with his actions in-game, and it was really throwing off Talents to the point where he collapsed almost in a similar fashion to his brother. And with one of the more comedic conclusions to an arc, Talon's Darby was defeated. So although this fight is very similar to an arc in Kaiji, where Kaiji is playing a game of Emperor and Slave, which is based on predicting your opponent's card, and Kaiji's opponent, Tonegawa, is using a device to read Kaiji's vitals, thus being able to know what card he is playing based on things like blood pressure. And comparing these story arcs with similar premises, I really think Darby the Player is a fairly poor example of compelling gambling manga. Not only was it twice as long as Darby the Gambler and half as interesting, the depth of the mind games involved were fairly surface level, and a majority of the arc was just watching video games be played, and had a significant lack of strategy involved when compared to Darby the Gambler. And the 11 chapter length really made the arc drag on at moments. But at least it was cool seeing video games be played with stands involved. Just imagine the intensity and competitiveness of a fighting game with stands of Star Platinum speed and reaction. So after the Darby brothers made their impact on the series, Araki took a break from gambling for the time being to explore other concepts, as pretty much every stand ability is based off of some sort of specific theme, theory, concept, or whatever strikes Araki's interest at the time, like a simple can of shaving cream inspiring the creation of the stand cream starter. But it wasn't too long until Araki dove back into the concept of gambling, and this time, it was completely different from his last two endeavors, which were almost disappointingly similar. This time around, we are dragged into one of the most intense games of rock, paper, scissors ever seen. So intense, in fact, the game actually bent the laws of physics. I know I've explained Dio and Jotaro offline before, but this shit right here is unexplainable. So the premise of this arc is John Ken Boy, or Ken Oyanagi, is obsessed with defeating Rohan Kishibe in a game of rock, paper, scissors. Because Ken believes that if he is able to defeat someone who is so young, so successful, and so admired all over the world, then Ken himself would be able to surpass Rohan and become someone someday just like him. And without going into too much of a stand analysis, the name of Ken's stand represents his motive: boy to man. What's so great about this arc is that unlike the Darby fights that are completely focused on outsmarting your opponent or a back and forth of tricks, rock, paper, scissors, at least in this arc, is portrayed about mental confidence. Although there is slight strategy involved, the simplicity of the game plays into the arc's favor, having a heavy focus on pure luck, but also dancing with the concept of rock, paper, scissors having nothing to do with probability, but purely mental strength, as in depending on how much you want to win, will decide your fate. But that's not to say that this game of rock, paper, scissors was entirely fair, as there is a good amount of cheating involved. But unlike the Darby fights, the only cheating in this arc was done by our protagonist Rohan. And the one who could be considered the villain here, Ken, never even imagined to cheat, as his goal was to beat Rohan fair and square, and he upheld this mindset until the final throw. The consequence of losing during this arc were very similar to what we have seen before. Instead of losing your soul, you would lose your stand and control over your body, so pretty much the same thing. Not the most original concept to build suspense, but I guess it works. And the resolve of this battle ended with a simple trick, but it was still leaning towards the concept of fate, as when Ken was feeling invincible, breaking glass that he knew was never going to hit him, and knowing that Josuke and Joseph would not intervene, it played into Ken's mentality of your will to win will decide your fate. But just Joseph showing up was Rohan's path to victory, as he found a way to surpass himself and surpass his own luck, which is the true challenge, unlike Jonken's boy will to surpass others. And Rohan cheats his way to victory in the final throw with complete confidence of his victory, because it was ensured. But even though Rohan had to cheat in this arc to win, it still had a very strong theme of luck and fate, which is definitely refreshing. But the one thing that has always bothered me about this arc is that Ken clearly went with scissors first against Rohan's paper, which should have resulted in boy to man automatically activating and sucking in the rest of Heaven's Door. But then Shizuka, of course using her invisible ability, forced Ken's hand into a fist. But I thought it was a pretty unanimously agreed upon rule that in rock, paper, scissors, you can't change your choice after throwing, but whatever. So although there are plenty of other examples of gambling within JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, like Rohan and Josuke's game of Chinshiro, and even Beetle Tendency to some degree, I just wanted to focus on the main arcs that revolve around playing some sort of game and that reminded me most of my time watching Kaiji. So as for now, I think that these story arcs were the best JoJo has to offer when it comes to an intense and compelling battle through a gamble.
レイズするのは俺の母親の魂だ。
Alright friends, thank you all for watching this video. I really appreciate it. Like if you enjoyed, and of course subscribe if you're not already. Surprisingly, this video took a lot more effort and a lot more time to make. When I was, first conceptualizing the video in my head, I thought it was going to be much simpler, but it ended up just going on and on and on. So I wanted to stop right here at the John Ken Boy arc. I could have mentioned the stuff with like Marilyn Manson and gone to a whole section on Beetle tendency, but I think you guys got the point. And JoJo doesn't do an amazing job at portraying gambling in manga. I think the peak was definitely at the Darby arc. I think that was the best gambling we saw in the series. But I did just want to mention those two other arcs and give them their own little segment because they were entire arcs revolved around some sort of game and a gamble, so they deserve their spot in this video. And of course, if you guys haven't seen Kaiji already, this video was almost a complete recommendation on here's an amazing series that does gambling way better than JoJo. Go watch it. Very fun series, and yeah, when I say I recently watched it, this video's sort of been in pre-planning phase for about 2 months now. I watched Kaiji in, I think, early September, so yeah, and it only took me like 4 days to watch. 50 episodes in 4 days, I don't know how I did it, but Kaiji was great. Definitely watch it if you guys enjoyed any of the gambling segments from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, or just if you don't even like gambling, watch it. So again, just thank you all for watching this video, and I really hope you enjoyed it. And also, go watch Kaiji. Zawa zawa.